Every day, your clients are bombarded with scary headlines about the housing market, right? Inventory is exploding. Prices are crashing. A recession is coming. All of these things. And if we're being honest with each other, most of us are left wondering, what the heck is true? What's just noise? Like, what do I make of all this, right? That's why today's episode is so incredibly important and timely. Friends, I've got Lance Lambert with me. He's the co-founder and analyst at ResiClub Analytics. Lance is one of the best in the business at cutting through all the noise, all that clickbait, and digging into the real data points that forecast where housing is actually headed. So if you're ready to stop reacting to the doom and gloom news cycle and start leading with confidence, this episode, this conversation is for you. Let's go collaborate with Lance. Lance, welcome to Collaborate with Cole. Are you ready to collaborate?
Housing. There's so much to talk about.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, everywhere you turn, there is. But man, I'm glad to have you here today. And I got to start with this. It's like every time I open my news app or see the news or anything, it feels like the housing market is either it's like collapsing tomorrow or it's booming beyond belief. There's like no middle ground. Just extremes. So let me ask you this. When you see these kind of headlines, like housing crash ahead or prices will never come down, do you ever just kind of shake your head and laugh? Or do you see something in the data that most of us are missing?
Yeah. So when I see some of these headlines and I try not to absorb too much of it, they don't really move me in one way or the other because I'm so deep into the data. I'm looking at the numbers all the time. I feel pretty confident with what I'm seeing in the data and the reports that I'm looking at and the reports that I'm writing up and the data and charts that I'm producing for people. And then the other side is I spent my career in journalism and media, right? I understand that machine. I understand that beast. And, I'm not going to, knock any individual profession or knock anybody. But, the truth with media is that a lot of journalists writing these pieces, they don't have expertise in the areas they're writing about. And that's for a few different economic reasons. One is that, media tends to be not the highest paying career field. And so people usually are kind of in it for a period and then they're transitioning into something else, right? Maybe it's into public relations, they're going into editing. They're not as much producing the content. And so they don't have as much time to become experts in the subject matter they're writing about. And then the other part is there's a real incentive in media to go to the extremes, right? And so and that kind of breathes into the content where they're really kind of, chasing some clicks. It's what happens at a lot of these places.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So they kind of lack some expertise and they're really after a lot of eyeballs. And the way to do that.
Let's back up just a bit. I don't want to make the assumption that our friends that are listening right now know exactly what ResiClub Analytics is. I'm a dues paying member. I'm a happily dues paying member. I get so much benefit and content out of it. But just if you'll nutshell it real quick, so our friends know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. So ResiClub is a news and research outlet that is focused on the U.S. housing market. So we're trying to connect the dots and figure out what is happening in the housing market at any given time and where things are headed. And so we very much focus on the for sale market, the single family market in particular. And so we're trying to figure out what is kind of the buyer seller dynamics across the country, what's happening to inventory, what's happening to prices, how does kind of like the monetary picture kind of work into all of this. What is happening in single family rentals, what is happening in home building, the institutional side of the market. And we're just trying to really boil it down and make it simple for people. So when they read the pieces, they see the charts, they just get it. And so we're news and research out, like I said, in my background, I had, worked at places like Fortune Magazine, Realtor.com, and Bloomberg. And, at one point I was going to go into becoming a data scientist. And I kind of pivoted back to kind of this in-between of data storytelling. But during my time at Realtor.com, those 2 years, I got really deep into the data. And that's kind of what set me off in this journey.
I love it. And I didn't know that about the science analyst. Is that what you said?
I wanted to become a data scientist. And so
Data
I had
science.
left Bloomberg, where I ran a lot of their rankings at Bloomberg. And I went to work at realtor.com. And I looked at it as a career pivot. And I was going to work a lot with their data science team. And I kind of saw it as a bridge job out of media, and without having to pay, 100,000 for graduate school. And so I did that, took some, was taking a lot of online courses through like Duke for Python, R, all that stuff. And then at some point, a couple years into it, I was like, you know what? I want to go into a lot of the data, but kind of that in between. And that's what led me back into media at Fortune for 4 years.
And I love that. And that makes so much sense now. I didn't know that, beforehand, but I've been a subscriber for quite some time now. And the market, the insights, the data that you have in there is so powerful, but it's put out there in a way that I can digest it and understand it without being a data scientist. So that's what I love. And these numbers are powerful because the right numbers tell a very different story than the headlines that we see, right? But so staying neutral in a world full of bias, I mean, it's pretty incredible right now. That's not easy. So what would you say, how do you make sure your analysis stays, unbiased and rooted in the facts, not opinions? And how can that same approach help some of our friends listening right now build more trust with their clients?
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that I like to keep in mind is that a lot of your value from information, yeah, you can kind of get a joke, you in the moment, it doesn't matter as much as long term. So if I tell you something, or I tell my clients or readers something, and 3-4 years later, that is still, like that kind of holds up, right? Or at least my framing of what I was discussing, and it kind of holds up over time. And I think the same thing with agents. If what you're communicating to people holds up over time, and that buyer who, they're seeing the news cycle all the time go in this direction, then this direction. And then 4 or 5 years later, when it's time to, buy another home, they're going to sell, buy something else. They remember that really sound advice that you had given them, that really sound insight that stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of how you build trust. And so I think trust isn't something that's a 24-hour, 48-hour thing. Now, of course, for agents, you kind of need to be able to build short-term trust as well. But a lot of trust comes over time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So knowing the data that you're focusing on, housing, single family, rental, things of that nature, how to keep it objective, the question becomes, how do agents actually use it to stand out, right? I mean, in today's market, it feels like every agent is essentially posting the same thing, just kind of regurgitated stuff. But the high performers, the top producers that maybe are using ResiClub, are positioning themselves as data experts with the content that you're putting out there. So give us some examples of what are they doing differently with your data to kind of set themselves apart in their local markets?
Well, I think one of the things, a theme that I like to, that really is at a core of a lot of my reporting right now, and I'm going to take it off a little bit of a tangent here and take it back in time a little bit. But so during the pandemic housing boom, or early on during the pandemic, you had the lockdowns, right? Everything's in a panic. We're trying to figure out what's coming next. And then all of a sudden, housing started to take off. And there was an increase in demand from the ultra low rates, of course, right? Which makes a lot more properties cash flow, brings in some investors, and brings in buyers, first time buyers, right? There's all the stimulus money, PPP, all of that. There's work from home arbitrage, where people in higher incomes in New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle could go and buy in areas like Phoenix and Boise and Tampa and Jacksonville and still keep their higher income, right? And then even the people who didn't flee these markets and move somewhere else, there was an increase in just demand for space. People wanted like that extra room for an office. Or if you were, living in one of these bigger cities, you might have been used to seeing your roommate 3 hours a day. And now you're seeing them 15 hours a day during the
Mm.
lockdowns. You're like, you know what? I don't like you as much as I thought.
Yeah.
Million more household formations. And so much of this housing demand was created in such a short window. Even things like also Airbnbs, because a lot of people are not having to work from the office. And so there was an increase in demand there. And so more people are buying the properties for that, all that demand at once. And with housing, housing demand is more elastic than actual supply of housing. It can go up, it can go down much more faster either way.
Yeah.
And the Federal Reserve estimates that to absorb all that demand during the pandemic boom period, new home construction, housing starts would have needed to increase 300% to absorb it all. And if anyone who's close to anything with construction would know there's it would be hard to even go up 50%, let
Yeah.
alone 300%, right?
Yeah.
Only so many people know how to do all the things that go into building a home, right? The skilled labor. Then there's only so many supply chains for lumber, window, concrete, all of that stuff that are ready at any given time to ramp up that much. And then the other thing is there's only so much entitled land that is ready and approved by
Right.
the municipalities, right? And so you can't go up that much for new construction in such a short window. And so what occurs? A really big overheating of prices, right?
Hmm.
And so that's what occurred in the market. Prices went up, too much too quickly, essentially, because there was so much demand. But and then once we had the interest rate shock, the affordability squeeze of that environment was really felt. Once mortgage rates went up from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%. But the thing is, and yes, some markets have come down in prices some, but generally speaking, prices have been fairly sticky here on a national
Yeah.
basis for existing homes. And so we're in this environment where prices haven't given up that much, but there's this real affordability strain on the market. And so as active inventory is built up in the market, it's kind of a release valve that is pulling back the overall levels of appreciation for a while.
Mm.
And then as incomes continue to rise, that affordability picture is slowly improving. It's taking time, but we're essentially in a moment of recalibration where the housing market is trying to work through this. But if you go back through history, there's many times this has happened, right? And not all of them led to, the 07-11 GFC bust. It's
Right.
happened many times. And usually prices act on a national basis kind of sticky. And usually you end up having a period where home price growth decelerates and income growth exceeds it for a period of time. And we kind of get a little bit of a healing for affordability. And so I kind of wanted to throw that out there because that's like
Yeah.
my big picture view of this housing market that we're in. And I think kind of starting from that point is kind of a healthy way. And that's not necessarily the tangent that an agent wants to give that whole thing, but that's kind of like a good framing to understand this market.
Yeah, certainly. When you mention recalibration, what are some data points that you're tracking that our friends listening might be able to actually like hang some meat on? Like, oh, okay, I can go look at that and I can look at that and I can follow along what he's saying. Or do you have data and charts that would actually illustrate that?
Yeah, so you could look at income growth. We're around 3-4% nationally. And then US home price growth, depending on the index you look at, is kind of like 0 plus 1% nationally right now. So that gap right there, it's not a huge healing, but it's a little bit. And so that's kind of going back to that discussion of that recalibration period for the housing market that we're in today. And you could look at some affordability metrics. It's got some of them are a little lagged, but the next year, more of them are going to start to show that improvement in affordability. And if we get any decrease in rates heading forward, and it doesn't even have to be a substantial decrease. I see today that the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate came in, according to Mortgage News Daily, let me make sure I get the number right, at 6.46%. And that, or at 6.45. And that's the lowest average mortgage rate of the year so far. And we're down from the cycle high of 8.03. So just on the mortgage rate side, we've seen some improvement. And if we could continue to see more normalization in the bond market, because the spread today, and I don't know how much you want me to get into this, but the spread between the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate and the 10-year treasury yield is
that thing
still,
is narrowing.
it's narrowing. And so it's at 2.27. And if we could, and the historic average since 1972 is 1.74, 1.75 essentially. And so if we normalized all the way back to the average, that is a 50 basis point decline in the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate. So that would be like the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate today being at 5.95, or yes, 5.95 instead of 6.45. And so if we get any give up in the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate and prices can continue to stay as close to zero as possible for a while and incomes continue to rise, we're going to see some of that affordability improvement. And so we are seeing some affordability improvement for the past 12 plus months, and we're not in a recession. So we are healing even without the economy taking a significant hit at the moment.
And the interesting thing, and we don't have to go down this road, I know you'll get it, but it's the way the media portrays the Fed is like the Fed controls all rates. But just to make a point, the Fed hasn't done diddly, right? They haven't done anything. And mortgage rates have come down over half a point since January 1 of this year. So I think the bond market is always ahead of the Fed in that regard, but just an interesting data point. We don't have to go down that whole rabbit hole. But
let's touch on it just for a second,
okay,
since you brought it up.
Yeah.
So the long-term rates, long-term yields in the economy, those aren't directly set by the Fed, but there can be some correlation, and there is some correlation, of course. But so the Fed sets the short-term rate, and the long-term rates are really set by the supply and demand in the bond market for the underlying treasuries, right? And so for mortgage-backed securities, when there's more demand for the mortgage-backed securities, bond prices and bond yields go inversely. So when there's more demand for the mortgage-backed securities, it pushes the yields and rates lower. And when there's less demand for the mortgage-backed securities, the yields and rates rise. And so when the Fed during the pandemic period is buying up a lot of mortgage-backed securities, that's pushing up the prices for those.
Demand.
Pushing up the demand and pushing down the yields on those. But since the Fed stopped buying mortgage-backed securities back in like Q1 2022, that decreased a lot of the demand for mortgage-backed securities because they pulled back and there wasn't necessarily a natural buyer who stepped in right away to buy them. And so that's where you started to see that really big spread. And we got up to a spread of 3 percentage point, 300 basis points at the height. And some of that also is because investors were a little wary of buying them because there was prepayment risk where they thought if we bought it and then a few years later, people were refining down, that kind of affects the return on those securities, right? But we have seen the longer that the Fed hasn't been buying mortgage-backed securities, there's slowly been more of that demand kind of stepping in to the market to replace it. We're kind of seeing some of that spread start to normalize.
And knowing that information is good, but not just knowing it, being able to maybe articulate it. And that's where I think a lot of us struggle with is, okay, I know a lot of this information, or I know some of it, but how do I articulate that and share that with a concerned client or prospective client? So what kinds of maybe ResiClub charts or visuals are agents using right now in their posts or their emails or client meetings that maybe really grab attention and build some credibility?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different reports I send out. Of course, one of the things that you'll see on the internet are some of the headlines about foreclosures being up 400 or 500%. During it, and what they are doing is pretty much a denominator effect where they're taking Q2 2021 when we're well into that forbearance period, right? When they had kind of shut off a lot of the foreclosures because they're trying to keep people in their homes and not foreclose during the pandemic. And then they're comparing that to where we are now, which is we're still actually below even 2019 levels for foreclosures. So this chart here It shows foreclosures, and you could see back in 06, 07, 08, foreclosures went parabolic. And we are seeing it rise slowly as we kind of start to normalize closer back to 2019 levels. But we have not seen foreclosures anything close to the 05 or to the 06, 07, 08 run up, 09, despite all the headlines that you'll see floating around on the internet. And so with foreclosures, somebody could say, okay, well, a foreclosure, obviously, that's not leading. Before that, there would be a lot of other signals, right? And what about those things? Well, if you look at the data, here's 90-day delinquencies, and we're still, again, like barely back to 2019 levels. Now, for some of the things like credit card debt, you are seeing it, the bottom 25th of society is getting a little pinched in this higher interest rate environment. There's some truth to that. And with student loans, you've seen that now jump back up now that those payments have
just
kind
came
of
out
returned.
of forbearance or whatnot. Yeah.
And so these reports that I send out, we run through that, right? Kind of explaining what happened on the student loan side. So people, if they want to dig into it, I have the data at their fingertips. And another thing you'll hear is that FHFA, people will say that FHFA is the new subprime. And it is true that the not FHFA, but FHA mortgages. And you have seen the delinquencies for those jump up pretty noticeably. But if you look at the numbers, here's what it looks like as terms of the overall pie. It's still not that big of a piece of the pie. And if you look at the data, FHFA or FHA, I always mix them up.
Don't throw Pulte in there, Bill Pulte.
I know, yeah. Is 12% of U.S. mortgages issued, or of the outstanding market. So we have as much of the data that you want to get into at your fingertips if different things are getting brought up, and we really get deep into it. And, not every report, you'll want to read and get into everything. But if it's a certain topic that, is getting raised by a client, we have the data there to help guide you through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And something else that our friends should know is you've been pretty remarkable. If there's something that I'm looking for that I might not be able to find, it's almost like you make it your mission. If you have capacity, right, to go dig something up, and you'll shoot me over an email, or you might incorporate it into your next, your next email out to your members. So I love that. And I love these visuals because they can do the heavy lifting, right? But sometimes charts only go so far. Like I might look at this, and if you're explaining it to me, like, okay, that makes sense. The data's there. But if I'm just showing this or sending this, a client might not necessarily be able to connect some of that, right? So how do you recommend agents turn something like that into a simple, relatable story or a post or something that might help a client make a good decision?
Yeah. So one thing that people can do is they can take my content and they could take it into ChatGPT. And if they need help kind of writing that as a post, they can use my content, and I give my ResiClub Pro members permission to plagiarize me.
Okay.
I'm fine. You take it into ChatGPT.
Good, because I've done it, and I feel better now.
Yeah. So and that's part of why I make this content, is I want to give people, if they're want help creating their own content, I want this to be a good resource for them, where they know that the numbers and information is really high quality. And so you could take it into ChatGPT and tell it, hey, can you help me write a quick blog post for my audience about this? And then you could even give them a couple of the data points on your market that you pull out from our interactive maps, and then put that in there. And then you could also tell Chat. Actually, I could just show you. Maybe I show people.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Okay, you ready? So I said, can you use this ResiClub article to help me write an article for my website, which is read by home buyers? and explain to them why this is a good opportunity for them. Please create a paragraph at near the top of the article that points out and notes my market Boulder has inventory that is up 23% year over year and is up 28% above pre-pandemic. Please keep the blog post to 350 words. Don't be too negative.
Love it. Boom.
And so it's an opportunity. The headline is why Boulder's housing market offers more options for buyers in 2025. Gives them a little bit of a rundown on how supply was extremely short during the summer 2020 to spring 2022. Buyers were competing in bidding wars. Sellers had all the power. Fast forward to 25, and many markets are shifting, giving buyers a window of opportunity. Nationally is still below 2019 levels. However, many regional markets, including Boulder, has now surpassed it, blah, blah, blah. Right here in Boulder, and it gives the individual numbers that I pulled out from the story. This gives buyers more choices compared to recent years, and sellers more open to negotiating on price and terms. For Boulder area buyers who've been waiting for a market with less competition, this is one of the best times in years to act. And then it gives a little bit more details.
So powerful. That is awesome. And I really appreciate that. I mean, that right there is like a class by itself. We could probably take that one clip and just share with agents how to create a simple, relatable, bite-size content using your data or any data, right, on doing that. And it's such a good reminder, because data without story doesn't necessarily move people. I mean, it might move a data scientist, right? But your layman, your normal loan officer or finance professional or real estate agent might not move them as much as just the data. So speaking of moving people, I know a lot of our friends listening right now are feeling kind of stuck, right? In this, you called it this recalibration that we're going through. Transactions are a little bit slower. Uncertainty is certainly high, and conversations with clients can feel tougher than ever. So from Lance's perspective, what encouragement would you give real estate agents about leaning into the data, maybe staying consistent and leading with facts instead of fear?
Well, I think when you have so many people out there that are kind of like all over the place, right? And they really bite into all the narratives that get pushed out there. And whenever there's, instability, whether it was, in April when the market was really amid the tariff tantrum, is what I called it.
Tariff tantrum.
Yeah. A lot of shock about what tariffs were going to do. I think it's kind of important to, to stay a little grounded and just try to, speak to the facts and kind of here's what I'm seeing, here's what the data shows. And I think if you do that and you do it over a long period of time, I think it builds trust and it builds credibility. I think, you can try not to go too much the other direction where you kind of like overhype it too much, right?
Yeah.
But I think being grounded is a good place. And, for me, during the, what I called the tariff tantrum period where, everybody's really afraid of what tariffs were going to do, I really dug in deep to the data and looked at like how much of residential construction is imported, right? And it's around like 8-9%. So it's a lot lower than people are kind of speculating online. And then the chunks that are imported, most of it's Mexico and Canada, and our, the tariffs with them, there was exemptions for a lot of that stuff. Now with lumber, that's kind of a different story because there's the Section 232 where there's some of these other tariffs that are kind of an automated process. But just doing that, it earned me a lot of credibility in the residential construction space with a lot of builders because there was just so much speculation thrown out. I mean, I saw groups that were talking about the input cost going up like 30-40%, like
Yeah,
just,
that's
or just
scary.
kind of throwing out crazy numbers. And there was a lot of fear. And so for me, I kind of seized on that opportunity to kind of just dig in deep to the data. Not
Love
to
that.
say there couldn't be any input increases, but kind of like to just kind of dig into the numbers. What do the numbers actually tell us?
Yeah, yeah, that's encouraging for sure. And hearing that makes me think if someone listening right now is ready to stop playing defense, which it feels like we're doing a lot of times, and actually step into that data, kind of that data expert role, if you will, they're going to need the right tools, right? And I mean, everything that you've shared today points to one thing, and that is if you want to cut through the noise, kind of cut through all that chaos and the clutter, and be the trusted advisor in your market, you need access to the right data. And I can say this with all honesty: I'm not just a fan of Lance. I'm not just a fan of your work. I'm also as I mentioned before, I'm a dues paying member proudly of ResiClub myself. I use your charts and your analysis in my own business, and I know firsthand how much of an advantage it gives me when I'm talking to my real estate agent partners, as well as my clients and my team, for that matter. So for the agent listening right now, after they subscribe to ResiClub, we're going to include the link in the conversation notes below. What would you say is the best way, kind of the entry point for them to start using the platform to position themselves as the local expert?
Well, I think one of the big things that I would like to see agents do more, and especially agents who are my ResiClub Pro members, is dabbling a little bit with their own content. I'm a really big fan of newsletters, and I'm not saying that agents need to have all of them are going to be people who have or need to have a newsletter, right? That's a certain lane. But I think just creating your own content and trying to do it consistently and continuing to do it. And the first few things you produce might not be your best work, but I think if you keep going at it, and whether that's, like different types of content for Instagram, for Facebook, maybe if it's even TikTok. The reason that I'm a fan of newsletters, though, is you're guaranteed delivery, right? If you have
That's a good point.
you have their emails, you're sending it to them, right? It's going to them. Now, you're not always going to get 100% open rate, but whatever your open rate is, you can count on that, right? Whereas you go into the algorithms have all the control.
Man, that is a great point.
Newsletters, you have a lot more control of distribution. And so I think it's a good place to constantly be getting emails, right? Of clients, of people that you have, and keeping them in spreadsheets or keeping them in, if you want to create a free newsletter. I also do training for ResiClub Pro members where I show them how to create their own newsletter. I did one of those webinars earlier this summer. They can use Beehive and do it for free. And so you have a newsletter, you send it out to them every week or whatever your distribution frequency is, and you're kind of staying in contact with some of those leads that you've gotten over time, right?
Yeah.
And then what could happen, and I know this happens because I know some people who built really successful mortgage businesses and other businesses in the transaction community where the newsletter is the core of their business, is, they'll be delivering them, and then randomly they'll get a response back from somebody and be like, hey, I need to buy a house in the next 2 months,
Yeah.
or blah, 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 right? So it's kind of keeping you connected with them, and that it's going to get to them. Whereas, all these other social medias, and the thing with social media is you're also catching and getting in front of a lot of other eyeballs that you might not want to always get in front of, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have a certain message that is, here's the message for buyers, and you want to cut out everybody else, you can go right to them. And so I'm a big fan still of email distribution. And I think that my content is really geared to that, where you can take it. I give you permission to plagiarize it, take it into ChatGPT, try to create your own version. And I did just message you the prompt that I used earlier. So if you want to share that with people,
Okay,
feel free to. I think that the 350 words on those posts is actually a really good ballpark. Because People don't have a lot of attention span, so you don't want to go too high. And then 350, if you want to cut some of it out and go down to 250 words, you have the breathing room to kind of take out from that piece as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the short class that you just gave us on taking your content that can apply to any kind of article, right? And loading it in there and basically just created your email. So it's not like you have to spend hours on putting this email together to send it out on a weekly basis. So, and also you're sharing something with your sphere, your database, whoever, something that's impactful and it's relevant and it's information, it's intel that I think they'll feel equipped after reading it, right? It's not a recipe of the month and it's not a, here's how many homes I sold, look at me. It's with the recipient's mind in mind, if you will, when you're sending them those things. So I think the open rate will gradually get higher and higher when people start realizing that, oh, this is actually some interesting content.
Exactly. And then the other thing it does, and this is true whether you do newsletters or other type of content, the more that you do it, the better you're going to get at it. You're going to start to get into a groove, understand what's really moving the needle, and what you're creating will get stronger over time. But yeah, I consider newsletters, I call them, I would consider it like a soft sell, right? You're kind of always selling to them without saying that you're selling to them, right?
Yeah.
You're just kind of keeping yourself top of mind for them. They're looking at you as an authority. And I think somebody that's doing this over a prolonged period of time, they're in it, right? They're doing this, right? And they're very serious about this thing and trying to really understand what's going on in the market. And I think the reader, the buyer, whoever they're trying to communicate to, I think that they pick up on that as well.
Yeah. And I'm gonna make mention of one little tweak that I've done, because I've really leaned into this email marketing. I've essentially turned off all of my corporate automatic kind of emails that go out because I think that's leading to more unsubscribes if I'm being quite honest. So something that I picked up, I don't remember if it's a tip that I got from my friend Jimmy Burgess. He's the head trainer with Berkshire Hathaway Real Estate Services, or it may have been Sharon, who was with Real, and now I think he's with Alex Hormozy over at acquisition.com. But it was about, the tip was sell the open. And what he meant by that is your goal in the subject line isn't to sell them a home or sell them a loan or whatever your product is. Your goal in that with that subject line is to get them to open the email, right? So first we focused on having some kind of a interesting or catchy title, something that didn't look like chat did it. It wasn't, hey, I hope whatever. But then more importantly, and this is where it was like next leveled for me, and I've watched my open rates climb by 10%, 9 point something percent over about a 60-day period, which was really, really cool. But they said, don't waste that first line in the body of the email. And what they meant by that, at first I was like, what do you mean? So if I'm sending you an email and it's about a whatever market highlights in Cincinnati, and then the first line says, hi, Lance, this is Cole with XYZ company, and I'm going to share some highlights about Cincinnati market, blah, blah, blah. Well, number one, I'm repeating what's in the subject line.
Yep.
Number two, if I'm your friend, if we know each other, I'm not going to be as formal as, hi, Lance, comma, this is Cole with. If I see that in the subject line and I'm not necessarily interested in what's going on in my market, like right now today, that's probably out of sight, out of mind. So one little tweak that I made is, might be market highlights for the Cincinnati area or whatever. And then the first subject line might be, can you believe what foreclosures have done? And then the line under that might be, hi, Lance, this is Cole, blah, blah, blah. Because in that subject, the first line, you might see that in your preview, right? In your preview window. And if it matches the subject line, it's kind of redundant, it's not as captivating. So that one little tweak, I've seen my...
All of that kind of goes into repetition, where the more you're doing it and you're kind of starting to observe your content, where you're like, oh, here is what the person who sees this is what they see, right? And this is what I'm getting in front of them. And how can I kind of grab their attention? How can I, keep them, engaged and then also informed? And I think the more that you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, friends, here's the reality, right? Your clients are overwhelmed by conflicting headlines. We've just talked all about that. And in a noisy market, the last thing they need is even more fear, right? They need clarity and they need confidence. And that's why what Lance and his team at ResiClub are doing is such a freaking game changer. I just can't express how much of a game changer it can be. They cut through the noise, they track the right data, and they give you the tools to position yourself as that credible expert. And he just said, he's giving you the rights. Copy my stuff, send it out, get the word out. So if you're an agent or even a mortgage professional who's tired of playing defense against the media narrative, which is never a great one, go check out ResiClub. It's like the unfair advantage that you need to kind of stand out and serve your clients better while growing your business. So Lance, man, I really appreciate the time that you carved out. Thanks so much for sharing your insight today. And for everyone listening, let's go lead with facts, not the fear. Lance, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And if they want to follow my work, just go to ResiClubAnalytics.com and put in your email.
Absolutely. And I will include all of your links. Friends, I'll have all of Lance's contact information, ResiClub information, everything in the notes of our episode here. So thanks again, Lance. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.